Alright, so I took a look at the videos that you posted up on the Discord, uh, two of which were full bouts and one of which was different. And I just figured that this method would be a lot easier to sort of go over what you were doing and sort of, just take a closer look into what I believe is one of your core problems. I'm going to skip ahead to the second one. I believe it was the second one that you posted, where you're fencing this girl and the final score was like 15-3. So, starting here, right off the bat, let's go there and go full screen. So, right off the bat is your on guard position. Your torso in this bout is not terrible. I think you want to redo how you're holding your blade. That can lead to a few things. How you're holding it here is you're basically trying to go for reach. You have the actual blade of it further away from your hand, and your hand is down and sort of pushed up against the bottom of the guard. This is something that can be done. I've seen fencers do it, but they're always fencers who have already been doing it for, a very long time, and so they know how to handle the blade. The thing is, at your level currently, you don't want to be doing this. Part of the problem, and this segues into something that I think I've seen a lot in all the other things that you've been doing, is you're taking things that that a lot of very elite fencers are doing. You're taking things from Aaron and O, and seeing things that you see in the Olympics and trying to adapt it into how you fence. The problem, so there's technically not a problem with this. Studying the best fencers is one way to become good. The problem is you're doing it too early. I can see in how you move that you're trying to basically skip ahead with, how your form is. You're trying to introduce bounces when you've barely managed to get past the basic foundation of footwork. But we'll go into that later, but that's one thing that I see immediately off the bat is you're trying to get a bit of extra reach with your blade without being really aware of how your point is really used. The thing is, from what I could tell, your awareness of the blade is about here when it needs to be up here. So having your hand further down the grip of the blade is not going to do you any favors. Here, you can see how it actually should be. And the reason for this, the reason why this is recommended for so many people to get comfortable with after, at least a couple years, is because this allows you a lot of point control. And the thing is, doing it this way allows you to really get. This is where your cutting power comes from. I'm kind of my brain's a little all over the place, but this is where your cutting power comes from, because all of a sudden it's not about your arm and it's not even totally about your wrist. It is within just your fingers. Your fingers are able to implement the few inches of cutting power that you actually need. You're not trying to, you shouldn't be using the entire blade to swing and slash. You need to be using just the very tip of the blade to cut a couple inches at the very end of your attack. And this grip is how you accomplish that. This grip should be reserved for when you've at least earned your C and you're thinking maybe my style in particular counts on getting every last inch of reach that I can. Some fencers don't even attempt this because their style just can't make use of it. So that's immediately the first thing that I need to mention. The rest of your torso in this video is not bad. You are maybe leaning forward a little bit, but that can be forgiven. The main thing in this bout are your legs. Your legs in this bout and in the others, although it's not as pronounced as in this one, is the main reason for a lot of other missteps that you encounter. The thing is, you're way too tall, you're leaning forward, your back leg is straight. It should not be straight. Even when, when you're in on guard position, they need to be much more bent. This girl right here, she has a much better stance, and it's all over. She's not exactly sitting down super low, but she's at the point that I can tell that she has decided where this is comfortable for her. And, everything else about her is very relaxed. You're a little bit out. Basically, I can tell you're very tense. She is very relaxed. Her torso is upright, her legs are bent, and basically she's much more relaxed than you look. And this allows her a lot more freedom of movement along the strip and the ability to basically react to whatever you're doing. Because your legs being like this and you being tense, this leads to a lot of attacks that could have gotten through but didn't, simply because they fell short, because you're too concerned about, just going forward and just going for it. She recognizes that very early on and basically waits for you to mess up. So, let's watch the first part of it. Okay, so immediately, going over the very preparation part. You go down and then hop forward. This looks like you're trying to do a flunge. And basically what that means is not only are you spending extra energy that you don't need in order to actually make that bounce, but it also means that you're basically committing to your attack. So even though she starts after you, she has a very stable, she has a very stable stance even in the middle of the footwork, and you do not. And what that leads to is basically you are now committed to the attack, but because you committed so early, basically right here, she knows what you're going to do. She knows what's going to happen, and because you started so early, she stops right when she needs to and is able to take it. So not too much happened there. She simply took over in time. If I'm being nitpicky, I will say that you did not do much to take over. You go back, and you don't really do anything. You try to interrupt there, but you do it, first of all, if you think that's a point in line, it's not. But I'll let you decide what that is supposed to be. If you want more advice on point in line, let me know, and I can, show you what point in line actually is. But, there's nothing really being done to try to interrupt her attack. You're basically waiting for the inevitable. You know, if you were actually trying to interrupt the attack, you need to be moving in and out. You need to be going slower and faster, accelerating and deaccelerating. You basically need to be as unpredictable as possible without getting too close to them so that they can attack, unexpectedly and still land. So you are forced onto defense, but then you don't really do anything to defend yourself. You just kind of wait for it to happen. But the thing is, even if you were trying to do something, you physically would have been limited because of your stance. Your on guard position does not allow for a lot of freedom of movement, which is why it's drilled over and over to every fencer at the beginning of every class, is because without this footwork, you are limited, you can't move very fast, you're not able to change direction very quickly, and if you try to move fast with this kind of footwork, you will injure yourself, and I personally can attest to that. So, you know, you really had to get down much lower. This girl, she's low enough that she's able to react to whatever you're doing. Now, she is bouncing there, but it's because she already knows that, especially from the last time that she put you on defense, and maybe if this is how you normally fence, she could have known from previous bouts that, once you're on defense, you don't really do a whole lot until maybe you're at the very end of the strip. From this bout, I can't really tell. Now, this one I wanted to talk about because right there you felt that it might have been yours, and there was a possibility that it could have been, but we're going to go over why it wasn't right here. So, you set up at around the same time, but again, I want to point out, right now your opponent is very stable, whereas you are not. You are physically committed to moving forward, and the only way to break that commitment is to stop your attack. If she was coming forward and if she had lunged, then she could have done so very smoothly. If she came forward in this exact same way and decided not to lunge, she could have stopped very smoothly or delayed the attack or gone backwards or anything. Basically, because of her setup with her stance, she had so many options. You limit yourself quite a bit simply by doing this and not really knowing how exactly to follow it up. So this is the downside of watching Olympic fencers and trying to do what they do. They start doing that only after they are very intimately familiar with how fencing with the basics work. You're trying to skip a lot of steps, which you shouldn't be doing. So here, you have already begun to search, and she is not, but because of that, she's seen what you are doing. And the thing is, here, you're also trying to attack with your entire arm. You go from this position all the way up around to that position. Whereas, even though it looks like she might do the same thing, you can see how little her arm actually moves. This is because not only does she see what you're about to do because your setup forced you so far forward, but I can already tell that how she holds her blade is, the way that I showed you before, which means she had a lot of time in practice to figure out how to be very efficient with her blade work. So she's doing, she moves second, she's doing maybe a third of the movement that you're doing, but she still gets the parry riposte. And part of this is because that right there, this is not balanced. You need to be balanced at all times, and that's never going to happen if your stance is always. I don't know what I just did. If your stance is always far up like that. Like, I think this is the lowest that you get the entire time, and you almost immediately move out of it. So, let's go to the other bout and talk about that for a while. So right here, I can already tell. You are lower to the ground. That's good. But in my personal opinion, you need to be lower. Your feet need to be closer together. And you cannot be moving forward. This entire bout, when I watched it, you were leaning forward. You were very eager to go. Many times you did a false start, which should have been counted against you. And you're just so eager. You're so eager to move off the line. And in Saber, that can be valid. But if you want to move off the line immediately, you still need to have this kind of stance. This is a very relaxed, very neutral position. You need to learn how to be like this the entire time, and then, if you want to, you can go backwards. If you want to, you can try to bowl them over, trying to, rip their throat out in the middle, or from here, just do a nice little simultaneous. But it needs to be from here. Oh, there you are. So, no matter what you do, you cannot have a stance like this. Because they haven't even started yet. And already, I'd wager this guy knows what you're about to do because he could just tell from this body language what you want to do. Now, I think you already know what the problem there is. But we're actually not going to look at that. We're going to look at the setup for it. Part of this has to do with the fact that you're far too eager to go forward. What that results in is your back foot. Oh, shit. Sorry, I had to plug my laptop in. Yes. So your eagerness to attack and how that affects your back foot and how it affects the rest of your attack. So your back foot starts, where it was on the on guard position, but because you're so eager to attack, you are bringing it so far forward, it's almost in front. No, it is in front of where your front foot was. And now you're taking a huge lunge. So I want you to try and notice something. Here, this is where you're beginning your lunge. As soon as your back foot lands, that's where you begin your lunge. And he is just finishing up his preparation. Now, technically, yes, you have begun your attack first. But because you moved so far forward and because you're so committed, that since they're moving slower, they can see what's about to happen. They know that they're not going to beat you in a game of trying to attack first because you've gone so far forward. But the thing is, with your back foot moving so far, all that's doing is giving your opponent time to realize what's happening. Once you're here, he knows what you're trying to do. So he's not going to go for a lunge. He's going to go for exactly what he does. He waits for you to finish, he parries, and riposts. And the thing is, part of the reason he's able to do that so easily is because he's not coming to you. You're very much going to him. You're trying to get to him and instead of trying to meet in the middle. And that is because you're taking such a huge step. You're practically jumping towards him. There can be reasons to do this, but this is not one of them. In this bout, you're constantly being outfenced by this guy because he has a very stable position almost all the time, and you're always leaning forward. You're always, too eager to attack. It looks like you have very little control. So that time, that should have been his. Really, all it was that saved you was a lucky remise. So he gets the parry, but your blade whipped up and managed to get him as he's getting the parry. That 100% should have been his, if not for a fact that you just got a lucky whip over. Because the thing is, you're very out of balance while he's very steady. So you're putting all your eggs into one basket, and that makes you predictable, and it makes it very easy to defend against. And there's another case of it. There's another example of it. You blast off the line, you jump forward to try to get ahead of him, but in reality, the more time you spend preparing, the more time your opponent sees what you're preparing to do. And you put everything you have into one attack, which means that you are locked into a single line, and it makes it, the opponent can realize that you're not going to go for any sort of trick, any sort of feint, nothing like that, because you're physically not able to. And then he just taps you. And you can tell, this is another way to tell that you have very little control, even when you're trying to blast off the line like that, is because in the aftermath, he may have already scored, so technically it doesn't matter, but you do not look balanced right now. You're leaning your torso, you're moving to the side. Earlier, it caused you almost to fall. Whereas this guy, his torso never moves more than maybe a couple inches forward. He's much more stable, and because of that, he's able to defend against a lot of your very wild attacks. So that one was weird because the call to fence was given a little late. But let me take a look at it. Okay, yeah, so I'm not gonna say that because the guy saying En garde pré aller is doing it way too fast, and he's doing it as just a very quick 1, 2, 3 count, which it shouldn't be. So that time I don't want to analyze because that was just luck of the draw. That was really the ref's fault. So that was another lucky touch that I mentioned before. You were off balance the entire time. It was only lucky remise that managed it. So here, this is what is a little bit frustrating to me. Is all sorts of bouncing. Now the thing is, I want you to notice both of you are bouncing. One is in offense, the other is in defense. But the thing is, with the way that your opponent is bouncing, he's still doing actual footwork inside of that. Whereas you're not really doing much at all. So, I want to point out, if your opponent chose to, right here, he can change direction. He can change the size of his footwork. He can do a lot of things. While you're in the air, you can't do any of that. You have a bit of protection because you have right of way, but that's only going to take you so far. Right of way can be taken, and right now, your opponent is in a better position to try and do that simply because he's on the ground. And again, so here he actually does attempt something like that. So even though it didn't work, the point is he was able to try because he is stable and you have nothing. And right here, you were in the air, you had a late reaction to it. That should have been attack no. And it should have gone to your opponent. Instead, you try to go forward, and the reason you do so, even after doing an attack no, is because you're so far out of your stance that you're basically going with the momentum so that you don't fall over. So, so I think that's really all I need to take a look at. Actually, I haven't seen this one yet. So, that one, technically speaking, was properly executed, but it was done in a very wild manner. So, the reason I say it was in a very wild manner is because your opponent is steady on their feet and their torso is upright. Meanwhile, your feet are sort of all over the place. You're leaning way far back and then way far forward. And the thing is, there's no reason to jump if you've already gotten right of way by your opponent falling short. So, even though technically everything you did was correct to actually execute this sort of technique, there was a bit of luck involved. And what I mean by that is, even though you pulled it off this time, it can't be relied on simply because of the way that you did it. So, if I was to give you any advice about your general fencing, it would be to slow down, to keep your footwork close, keep your feet together, sit down further on your legs, much further. You know, you need to get used to being able to sit down and to squat on your legs quite a bit, and slow down and keep your torso upright. Right now, you're trying to do a lot of things that are frankly beyond your skill level simply because you're trying things that require a very innate reflex of proper form and, proper on guard stance, and you're biting off more than you can chew. I feel like if you keep doing this, you eventually will hurt yourself and you will not win very many bouts. You need to take a look at your opponents because all three of your opponents in these bouts were all very stable. They were much more stable than you were, and as a result, it allowed them more freedom of movement. It allowed them to take more advantage of what distance and timing was available to them in whatever scenario. And it basically allows you to do so much more than what you're capable of doing because you don't have that same stance. You're not very solid in how you move. You're, you're too far up. So right here, Again, it's the same thing. You're too far up, you're too prone to moving your torso forward and back, and how you hold your blade is basically reminiscent of someone who saw how the pros do it and now wants to try it themselves, despite not really understanding why you don't start with this. So I realize that that may have been a little bit harsh, but I mean, I really think that you need a lot of work with your stance, because I feel like I don't know if you have a coach who pays a lot of attention to how you fence or not, but this looks like someone who doesn't practice the basics well enough. You're not going to get very far if you continue what you're doing. And like I said before, you will, in all likelihood, hurt yourself. And I do not want that to happen to anyone. So I would heavily recommend sticking to the basics and not doing all this sort of wild stuff that I see. You know, no more bouncing. No more bouncing. You cannot bounce anymore. You need to keep your torso upright, and you need to sit down further on your legs. Those are the top three things that I would recommend.